Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Prosperos Sunday meeting. The Prosperos organization puts on these meetings each month to share the ideas of our school and to offer insights by our speakers and our instructors. The Prosperos is a school of therapeutic education which is based on ontology, which is the science of being. Because our basic premise is that under and back of this universe of time, space, and change, good and bad, evil and opposites, there is a fundamental reality that is whole, sound, eternally complete and perfect, that is the true nature of each one of us and of all of us collectively. And the purpose of our teaching is to present methods whereby, by letting go of your bias or prejudice or upbringing or whatever else is conflicting with this underlying reality in your life, that you can free yourself into it and let it express more fully through you and experience a fuller and more profoundly happy life. Our speaker today is Richard Hartnett, a mentor in the Prosperos who I've known for some decades, a very good friend of mine, and a great inspiration to me in my journey down this path of self-study. I first met Richard in the 1970s in Santa Monica before he moved away and before I moved away. And he was particularly inspiring because one of the first things I heard when I moved to Southern California to listen to the Prosperos sort of core group do its thing was I got to listen to Richard Hartnett introduce a Sunday meeting. And he reminded me of one of the tenets of our basic principle of translation, and that is the Prosperos does not teach you how to think. It teaches you how to think, but not what to think, which is extremely important for an educational institution. And Richard, in his Sunday meeting, brought that point home to me, and also the point that any good spiritual study is a bit of a lighthearted and humorous thing, because that morning he reminded me that the Prosperos doesn't teach you what to drink, but how to drink. Those were the days.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, Richard has continued to be an inspiration to me and the people that he counsels and teaches throughout the decades. It gives me great pleasure to turn the meeting over to our speaker today, mentor, counselor, tarot instructor, and just all-round wise and good guy, Richard Hartnett.
Okay, let's see. I'm trying to set up my, okay, can you guys see that?
Yes.
Ontology, Science of Beingness. I wanted to have that up. I don't have a lot of graphics, but I thought it might be nice to have a little bit to help with our presentation today. Some of you know me from my tarot business, my tarot classes. I've got several of my tarot students that have signed in here today to joining us in this talk. And some of you know me from my other spiritual business called Quantum Spirituality, but most of you probably know me from being a mentor in the Prosperos. And it is my hope that one of the things that I will accomplish today is I will show you how or what ties these three things together. And actually what it is ontology, which is defined as the science of beingness. The Prosperos is a school of ontology, and for most of my adult life, I have been and continue to be a mentor in the Prosperos. Now, what that means is mentorship in the Prosperos is the equivalency of a minister. It is under my mentorship that I actually perform weddings and do memorial services, and also it's under my banner of the Prosperos that I'm a spiritual counselor. So it really is sort of the core thing, and I became a minister in the Prosperos before any of these other things really developed. I was a minister before I actually started working with the tarot. The reason I got interested in the tarot was because I was wanting to find people that were interested in and open to spiritual explorations. I wanted to find people that would benefit from the teachings of the Prosperos, because when I actually first took my classes in the Prosperos and actually started to apply the principles that I had learned, it significantly and profoundly changed my life for the better. For me, it no longer became a question of what to do when I was confronted with a problem or a challenge. For me, it became a question of, am I going to do the work? Will I use the tool? And so I thought that it'd be great to find other people that might be looking for something. I guess, if we were in a desert and we were thirsty, I would want to share the sweetest water I could find with you. And the Prosperos teachings have always been, for me, the sweetest water that I could find. So that's what got me interested in the Tarot. And I actually became certified with the American Tarot Association as a Tarot teacher. And I met many, many students through it, and I continue to meet people. The other thing that was interesting about getting involved with the Tarot is it really helped me to be aware of what was going on in what you might call the New Age, the pursuit of metaphysics. As part of my training as a mentor in the Prosperos, one of the things that I did was I went out and I looked at many, many different spiritual paths. I studied Buddhism and Native American spirituality, to name just a couple, because I was always looking for the golden thread of truth that tied everything together. So as I said before, the common thread that ties everything together, the Tarot, my quantum spirituality business, and the Prosperos, is ontology, which is defined as the science of beingness. Now, when you hear that phrase, it's important to really take note of the fact that it's the science. And one of my good friends I'm seeing over there chomping away is Will. And Will and I have always had great discussions about science. And I like Will because Will is more than willing to contend with me about different issues. And that's always been really valuable, because what I find is if you cannot question a teaching, if you cannot question your understanding of something, if you cannot subject yourself to questioning, then you're not really validating what you understand. You're not really proving it or disproving it. And the great thing about science is it really teaches us a process of questioning, because questioning leads to greater understanding. It leads to greater recognition of what the truth is. So one of the questions that we could say, or is sort of essential to the idea of ontology, is, as I said, ontology is defined as the science of beingness. So the question is, what is beingness? What ontology is after is what is so in the universe, or what is true. And one of the things that science teaches us is that whatever is true, and I'm not talking about a relative truth about I'm in Colorado and some of you are in California or Oregon or somewhere else. I'm talking about the truth about the laws and principles that run the universe. And whatever is true and present in all of the universe. There was a time in which there was some question about whether or not gravity or other principles might not be true in outer space, but they actually figured out ways to prove that the laws or principles that govern the universe are as true on the planets or out in the galaxies as they are here on the planet. And that whenever we run into something that seems to contradict what we already know or have discovered through science, science advocates that we pursue that knowledge because there's an underlying conviction that somehow these two things tie together, that somehow they are part of a oneness universe, and that, as I said, whatever is true in one part of the universe is true everywhere. Now, science has become a great servant for us because it has helped us to overcome superstition. It has helped us to discover what the truth is. And once you know what the truth is about something, then you can be in complete accord with it. You can be in harmony with it. And that is extremely valuable to us. It's like once you understand mathematics, you can apply that no matter where you go or no matter what you do. And that's a great gift that science has given to us. But one of the things that I've noticed is that science is maybe taking itself a little bit too seriously. And many scientists actually have begun to advocate that we abandon religion. And I understand that. I mean, I understand that many people have had bad experiences in their religion that they were raised in, and that maybe it was oppressive for them, or maybe they were subjected to abuse. And I'm not necessarily, I mean, sometimes abuse looks like, when I was a kid, I used to always be the one that would raise his hand in catechism class and ask the difficult questions. And I remember I used to do that, and the Monsignor his neck used to get bright red because he didn't like my questions. But my attitude back then is the same as it is now. If something is valid, then it should be able to be subjected to any questioning. And through the process of questioning, you either deepen your conviction about it, your understanding of it, or you recognize that maybe you're holding on to a sacred cow that needs to be redefined. Now, that's part of how I got into the quantum spirituality thing, was that in quantum physics, science was led to the point where they began to recognize that there was some sort of relationship between the observer, the scientist doing the quantum physics experiment, and what he was observing. When a scientist was looking for particles, he'd find particles. When he was looking for waves, he'd find waves, and they couldn't figure out why it was different. So what that led them to was the realization that somehow there is a relationship, a connection between the scientist and the world in which he was observing. So you could say that science has taught us that we do have a dynamic relationship with the universe, and that the universe is responsive to our thoughts. So that's where quantum spirituality ties in, is I have these classes where I go deep into the quantum physics material to help us to understand the connection between thought, consciousness, and the material universe. But getting back to this idea of what has happened with science, is many scientists have advocated that we abandon religion altogether because of some of the bad things that have happened in the name of religion. And I'm sure I don't have to elaborate on what those are. But the downside to that is that when you abandon anything that has any kind of, and let's use the word spiritual as opposed to religious, because spiritual is broader than religion. When you abandon any sense of there being any kind of spiritual energy in the universe, then what you're left with is the universe is nothing more than a cold and impersonal machine. And when that is true, we are left feeling it on occasion that we are all alone in the universe and that there is no help. Without some sense of a higher intelligence available to you, and maybe even as a higher intelligence that's part of you, if you don't have any sense of that, when you get into a place of despair, I think it's not that hard to take that step towards suicide, because you see no way out. If all you have is your ego, there is no way out. And one of the things that ontology teaches us is that there's something greater than our ego. You could say that what is greater is our soul, or you could say it's just our pure ability as consciousness to think. And having some sense of that can help you to overcome the limits of your ego. Because when all you have is ego, it can be really a problem, and we can fall into despair. So just as quantum physics has compelled us to reevaluate our conception of the physical universe, it is also important for us to reevaluate the metaphysical universe. I left religion behind because there were many questions that they just could not answer for me. And my conviction was that if I looked hard enough, I would find something that would answer the questions that I had. And I will say that ontology, which is what the Prosperos is about sharing, is that thing that I was looking for. And I'm hoping that today I can give you some idea about how that might be helpful to you. Now, we know that a lot of people have turned away from religion, and that there's been a lot of, as I said earlier, New Age stuff, and that some of that can be really, really valuable. But being part of the New Age, I've also seen a lot of stuff that is just, I can't think of another word other than to say silly. I did some work with a friend of mine several years ago. She was in a very serious crisis, and I used the teachings that I had as a mentor in the Prosperos. I was using that in the back of my mind to sort of give her spiritual counseling, and I worked with her for several days, and she was very, very grateful for the work that she and I did together. And 15 years later, I ran into her, and she said to me, you know, that you really changed my life when we did that work, which was based upon Prosperos teachings. She didn't know that, but you know, I know, I'm letting you know that. And so what she said to me was, I'd really like to give you something to thank you for that. And I said, what is that? She said, well, I've been involved with this really big, famous organization, and I'm not going to name it, but the guy who is the head person in that organization, very charismatic, very high profile public figure. Let's just call him Tony Baloney. Okay. I'll let you figure out who that might be. So she gave me this thing that was worth $1,000. So I got to go to a Tony Baloney weekend. And I was like really curious about, there was like 300, 400, 500 people at this event. And it was really a pretty interesting circus, I guess is one way to say it. When the thing started, they opened the doors and there was this loud ruckus music playing, and there was people dancing on stage, and everybody was really enthusiastic and passionate and everything. And I'm like, wow, you know, this is very energetic. This is going to be really interesting. And we got in there, and for 3 days, I listened to Tony Baloney talk about how you can change your life just by believing in yourself. And if you just believe in yourself, you can do anything. And one of the things that Tony Baloney had us do was he had us walk across hot coals. Now, that was something I had never done before, and I was quite excited about the prospect of doing that. And I will say that it was a very powerful exercise, and it did give me a sense of the believing myself was really valuable and important. And so that was the thing that I got out of the weekend. But when it came to the actual teachings, there wasn't really anything of any substance other than believe in yourself, which, as I said, I think it's good, but I don't think it goes far enough. I think you have to find out how to work with your consciousness, how to work with your thoughts, so that you can get erroneous thoughts out of your consciousness, so that you can have a more effective life. Because just like, as I said before, in science, we're after the truth. Well, if you know the truth about something, then you can operate in accordance with that truth, and your life is going to work much better for you when you know what the truth is. And knowing the truth is more than just believing in yourself. It's that there's some universal truths. So there's one other thing I want to share about this, and that is, like you said, there's a little bit of silliness. Somebody needs to mute their microphone. There's a little bit of silliness that goes on in the New Age. Actually, a lot of silliness. Another thing that I wanted to talk about is you have to do hard work. If you really want to grow, if you really want to change, if you really want to eliminate erroneous thinking in your consciousness, you have to work at it. It isn't something that's just going to happen with a little bit of, positive thinking, or a little bit of affirmation or something, you have to actually go in and examine what your beliefs are, what your convictions are about life, so that you can change these things. One of the things that sort of cracks me up is they do this thing in the New Age called fluffing your aura. And basically what they do is they just sort of wave their hands around in the air above your head. And it's like, well, yeah, I do think that there is something that you might call your aura. I know my Cookie actually sees auras. And I do think there's some truth to that. But I don't really think that waving your hands through your aura is necessarily going to change limited thoughts or limited beliefs that you have that might be getting in the way of you really stepping forward in your life. One of the things that I also run into in the New Age is this idea that if your consciousness determines your reality. Now that I think is true. But there seems to be this idea that you can go look, you can just, if you can think whatever you want, and you can bend the universe to your will through your thoughts. Well, I would say that they're only half right. Your consciousness does determine your experience of reality. Where you know what is true in the universe, your life works and your life is harmonious. And where you misperceive what's going on in the universe or what's going on in your world or in your life or in your consciousness, where you misperceive, the universe is really good at reflecting that back to you. So yes, your thoughts are one of the most powerful things, if not the most powerful thing you have. But you have to recognize that you can't just make the universe be whatever you want it to be. You have to figure out what's true and work with that. And that's what Prospero's teachings do, is they help you to examine your thoughts. That's why Al said this earlier in the introduction. That's why we say we don't tell you what to think. We work with you in terms of how to think. And how to think is working with your consciousness, working with your thoughts, working with what's in your consciousness that might get in the way. So when I started to share with people the Prospero's teachings, one of the things I ran into a lot was I saw that people sort of got it. They sort of got that what we were saying, but I also saw a lot of times people would back away from it. And I was like, well, why is that? Why are people not wanting to use this thing that's so powerful? And what I recognized was that for many people, anything that looks like religion, because they had bad experiences when they were growing up, that there's a little bit of distrust. Now, our organization does not ask you to accept anything that we say, just carte blanche. We actually suggest to you that what you should do is you should prove or disprove to yourself these teachings by working with them. But as I said, for many people, there's a fear of doing the work. And so what I think is necessary is to go back and to root out some of your early childhood conditionings, your early childhood beliefs that you got. Some of it might be from religion, some of it might be from your family, but to really root out some of these ideas so that you can get rid of things that are in the way of you being more empowered in your life. So you can get rid of the things that might keep you from being the person that you want to be. One way to say this would be willing to challenge the sacred cows of old thinking. If we treat certain ideas as sacred cows when we are spiritually starving, we're not going to get anywhere. We're not going to be fed. But I think there's a great deal of abundance in the universe. I think there's a great deal of support in the universe, but you have to trust that support is there. And more importantly, you have to trust yourself to recognize the truth, and also to recognize what's not true. To trust within yourself that you have that ability to be discerning so that you can work with your thoughts and change your worldview. not by bending the world to your thoughts, but instead by changing your thoughts to be more truthful, to be more accurate. That, as I said before, that is hard work. So when you really get this, when you really understand ontology and how ontology gets you to the place where you recognize your power of your thoughts, that you can literally redefine your experience by correcting the errors in your thoughts, it's a very profound and significant realization. As I said before, it's no longer a matter of what you do, it's a matter of whether or not you're going to do the work or not. And it's recognizing to some extent that much of what you believe about the world is nothing more than an illusion. It's nothing more than your mind presenting to you where you know the truth and where you misperceive. It's a little bit like that thing in The Matrix when the main character, I think his name was Neo, comes to understand that what he thought was true about the universe was nothing but illusion. And his buddy, Orifice, says to him, okay, so at this point you got to decide, are you going to take the red pill or the blue pill? And he says, if you take, I believe it was the red pill, you're going to go deeper down the rabbit hole. You're going to really see what the universe is like that you live in. But if you take the blue pill, then you can go out back to believing that what you did believe, which was erroneous. And I think that that's a really significant point that we all go through when we really pursue what is true in life, what we really pursued our understanding of ontology. It's a significant choice. But I think if you do make that choice, I think what you'll find is that you can start to really be empowered. You can start to really change your experience of life. The Prosperos is not a religion. We are a spiritual organization. So maybe just for a second, I want to talk about the difference between religion and spirituality. Religion, I think if you look at most religions, you'll see, if not all religions, I think it's true about all religion, is they sort of present that they have the final understanding of the universe and that they really don't want you to question the doctrine. And even though I think there's a great deal of wisdom in the texts for many religions, I think there's also a lot of garbage. If you look at it as a whole, you'll find some silly things like it's okay to stone your neighbor's daughter, you shouldn't eat shellfish, and other really ridiculous ideas. But then if you go a little further, you find stories. You find stories like the story of Moses in the Bible or the story of Joseph in the Bible. And if you look at these stories metaphorically, you can begin to recognize that that they have wisdom for us that we can actually use. I wrote 2 books on Greek mythology, the New Old Gods and also the Call of the Soul. These books, I picked Greek mythology because I thought it might be easier for people to look at these stories and to really work with that, because it isn't like requiring that you necessarily question your religion, but it is sort of expanding your sense of what is true in the universe by seeing that there's wisdom in Greek mythology. Carl Jung did some really wonderful work where he went around to all the different cultures and he looked at all of the different mythologies, and what he looked for was the common ground that they all shared. And that common ground is the thread of truth that runs through all of them. And I believe, and it has been my experience, that when you look for that golden thread, you are doing exactly what the universe wants you to do. We are here to be conscious beings. The most important thing we can do is to use our consciousness to figure out what is so, because when we become aware of the laws and principles that govern the universe, then there's no problems. that we cannot overcome. There's no challenges that we cannot meet. But to do that, you have to get past that limited idea of religion. You have to get to the place where you look at things as from a spiritual perspective. And what to me, what spirituality is about is recognizing that there is some sort of guiding intelligence in the universe of which you are a part, that you are one with that intelligence that is not separate. One of the cornerstones of ontology is there is but one universe. Sometimes it sounds to me like people are all well and good with the laws and principles in science, but when it comes to the metaphysical universe, it's almost as if it's a different universe that operates on a different set of rules. And that's not the way it is. We live in a oneness universe. So whatever's going on in the spiritual universe or the metaphysical universe also corresponds to what goes on in the physical universe, in this sense that both the metaphysical universe and the physical universe expresses according to law and principle, and that you can come to know these laws and principles and you can make them work for you. Now, a simple example of a law or principle in the metaphysical realm is karma. This is a simple idea, and the idea of karma is that when you put energy into something, or when you express yourself, when you put energy out towards the world, like if you're selfish, or you steal, or you're good, or you're loving, whatever energy you put out in life comes back to you. And how that makes perfect sense when you think about the fact that we live in a oneness universe. We don't live in two universes, we live in one. So whatever energy we extend out towards our fellow man, towards the world itself, well, that energy comes back and haunts us. You could even see that maybe the problems of the fires in California have to do with global warming, which has to do with our, using energy without thinking about the consequences of how it's affecting the environment of the earth. And now that karmically is coming back and it's causing us some problems. So we have to reevaluate the relationship we have with the physical world. So ontology is all about looking at science. It's looking at spirituality. It's looking at your life in order to understand what is so in your life. What's the truth that's affecting your life? What's the truth that's affecting all of us? And, to help you to really get to the place where you understand this more fully, I'm going to offer a series of introductory sessions, short, what I'm calling lessons in ontology. And these will be available through the Prosperos website. And oh, by the way, I meant to say this earlier, that, if Al Haferkamp did a really wonderful presentation on ontology. I actually had the opportunity to listen to it. I did wake up, not in time to introduce him, but I did wake up in time to hear his presentation. That was really good. And I'd recommend to you that you check that out. I think you can get to that presentation through either the Bathtub Bulletin or the Prosperos.org website. And I think that's really worthwhile. So anyway, as I was saying, I'm going to do a series of lessons where I'm going to, one of the things that was so challenging about doing this talk was there just seemed to be so much material. It was hard to figure out what to include, what to put in, and what to leave out. There's more than I could possibly cover in an hour. I hope that today I have whetted your appetite for ontology. I've whetted your appetite for discovering or deepening your relationship. And I hope that you know that through the process of gently looking at and questioning some of your core beliefs, you're not in any way being disrespectful. In fact, if anything, you're being more respectful because you're operating like scientists on a confident expectation that you can know the truth and that there is a truth there to be discovered. And when you know what that truth is, then you can be in perfect harmony with that. But each of us has to find our own relationship with truth. Each of us has to be willing to do the work. And I'll be honest with you that this work is not easy, but it's effective. fluffing your aura, I don't think really does very much. Standing up and down and shouting and screaming and listening to loud ruckus music and watching Tony Baloney walk around on the stage, I didn't find that to be particularly effective either. But I will tell you that if you do the work, you will find that your life will become much richer, that you will be much more empowered. And that's what we in the Prosperos want to do, is we are here to be of service. We're not interested in having you, become subservient to us. What we want to do is we want to empower you to be the best person you could possibly be. We want you to find your own relationship with the universe and to be empowered to achieve whatever it is that you want to achieve. We do want to support you in stepping forward, and we will do whatever we can as teachers in the Prosperos to support you in that. But ultimately, you have to be the one to take that step on your journey. And one thing you can do is you can tune into my lessons in ontology, which will be free. So, well, I shouldn't say free. In fact, what I will say is the cost for the lessons in ontology is going to be prohibitively expensive. And what I mean by that is you're going to have to pay a high price. You're going to have to pay attention. You're going to have to pay attention, and there is no money-back guarantee. But I will say this to you, that if you do pay attention, you will find that your life will be profoundly enriched by the teachings. So before I open the floor up to questions and answers, I wanted to read from you something that we use in the Prosperos whenever we present our Prosperos classes, and it's from the teachings of the writings of Khalil Gibran. And in his book, The Prophet, he writes, and then his teacher said to the Prophet, "Speak to us of teaching." And he said, "No man can reveal to you aught but that which already lies half asleep in the dawning of your knowledge. The teacher who walks in the shadows of the temple among his followers gives not of his wisdom, but rather of his faith and his lovingness. If he is indeed wise, he does not bid you enter the house of his wisdom, but rather leads you to the threshold of your own mind. Have faith not in a doctrine, an organization, a guru, or a mentor. Have faith in your ability to recognize the truth, and the truth will set you free." So now I will ask you if I'm going to open the floor up for any questions that people might have. So what do I need to do? Suppose you should unmute yourself so you can ask questions or make comments.
Well, Richard, I will say that that was one of the best introductions to ontology that I've ever heard. And so I'm really glad that we have it now. We're going to be able to publish it on YouTube.
I think you're muted, Richard.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, I don't know why you got muted.
Oh, because I did that. So thank you, Ben. That was really great. I'm glad you felt good about it. You know what, Will? I actually think that I don't think there's any reason to doubt what you said about there being multiple universes. There was a time when we thought that the Earth was the only place that existed. And then as our consciousness expanded, we became aware of the fact that there were planets, and then we became aware of the fact that there was other solar systems and that there's other galaxies, and that it appears as if the universe is infinite. What I think it also could be said is that it's infinite in terms of dimensions. But I think our thinking is, in the Prosperos, is that whatever is true no matter which universe you live in, no matter which universe might exist. A lot of scientists seem to think that the Big Bang is the only thing that exists in the universe, but I wonder whether or not there might be multiple Big Bangs, and that a truly infinite universe would be truly infinite, which means that there might be multiple places that are going through something similar to what we're going through. But again, one of the cornerstones of ontology is that that law and principle is universally true. Something as simple as 2 + 2 = 4 is true in our universe, and if there was an alternate universe, I think it would also be true there as well. And if you look at anything that's that self-evident, there isn't really any possibility of anything other than that being true about 2 + 2 = 4. So I think that there's room to accommodate these new ideas that people are putting forth about there being alternate realities or alternate universes, but still within the idea of that truth is universal.
So Richard, I have a question.
Go ahead.
This is Al, and I pose this question because I hear it a lot from people, and maybe I don't know if it's on anybody's mind here today, but so hearing you talk about ontology was very inspiring and such, but it's in an everyday situation. I mean, I'm at work. I have an employer that I work for who's clearly a racist SOB, very prejudiced, doesn't treat me fairly. How does ontology help me deal with this guy?
I have to think about that for a minute.
Can I say something?
Yeah, Cookie wants to say something. Go ahead.
I think, Al, that it would help you change what you're expecting from your employer, to look at his situation differently and yours. And if that expectation looks different through either RHS or translation, then it makes things move a little smoother for you.
Okay, so the next question I would get from the person that brought me this question in the first place is, okay, well, what is RHS in translation?
Yeah, and you know what? I want to respond to the first question before we go down that road, because that's pretty significant question. Well, I think that it's really easy with somebody who's racist to get into an adversarial relationship. I think it's really easy to take sort of a contrary position. And one of the things that I have found in my practice of ontology is to, rather than to take the bait of arguments, because I think there's sort of I think in a way people that do that kind of racist thinking, they are asking for somebody to challenge their thinking, because they don't just keep it to themselves. They're sort of always throwing it out there, because I think in a way there's a part of them that intuitively knows that there's something erroneous in their thinking, or there's something that doesn't work about that thinking. So I look for some sort of common ground, a place where we can begin to build a sense of our connection as opposed to our disconnection. And that from there, we can begin to ask the difficult questions, that we can begin to be loving. Why I think sometimes people are racist because they have such fear of anything that's different. And I think that if you can help them to explore the common ground, I think that it creates the opportunity to bridge the gap. Now, what is RHS in translation? That's been one of the major questions I think we in the Prosperos have been trying to figure out how to convey this to people who don't know what it's about, because it does at times appear to be almost like a different language. But what I would say is that with both RHS and translation, what you're doing is you're using a tool to really examine what is in your thoughts, what is in your consciousness, in order to root out erroneous thinking. Well, we advocate that there is but one universe. So in a oneness universe, anything that's other than oneness is erroneous. So, I mean, there's several steps that we do in that process of RHS and translation to get to that. But the essential idea is that when you use these tools, you eliminate limited thoughts. And I think that's really one of the key things that we're after, is getting rid of erroneous thinking. You know, one of the things that I love about the Prosperos is that we are such a diverse group. In fact, the story I always tell is that when I first went to a Prosperos event, thanks to my good friend Ben, who I had known since high school, he invited me to a Sunday meeting, and I went into the Sunday meeting, and what struck me was that there was such a diverse group of people. There were people there that were very conservative in their dress and very conservative in their manner, and there was hippies, and there was transvestites, and there were gay people, and there were lesbian people, and there were old people, and there were young people. And the thing that struck me is, what in the heck do all of these people have in common? What is it that these people all seem to be resonating with? And I think the idea is that when you recognize that there is but one universe, and we are all expressions of that oneness, expressing itself in infinite diversity, then we start to accept our differences, as opposed to feeling that we are apart, that we are not connected, that we are not part of oneness. We see our common ground, and so we become more loving towards each other, more accepting of differences, so that we can get along, I guess. So that's what I have. Anybody else want to chime in?
Yeah, well, one thing that's helped me in that regard, somebody else misbehaving or being an asshole or just being flat out deadly wrong. One thing that I just imagine for myself is that I have a consciousness of myself, sort of, like maybe it goes out this far, and then everything else is outside. I will, in my mind, expand that consciousness to embrace that problematic person, but also to expand actually to everything, because I know that in principle, there is only one that embraces all there is. But from that perspective, then I ask myself, well, what do I believe about this person? And now those beliefs don't pertain to just my mind. My mind is expanded to embrace them. So these would be beliefs actually manifest and now picture the world that I perceive. And once I actually write down what are my beliefs about this person. Well, of course, those beliefs can be translated. And basically, when you translate, you are asking yourself, well, is this belief in alignment and harmony with universal principle or not? And you work that through in your mind until you realize that anything that's erroneous about it is simply impossible, and then it dissolves.
I want to expand that a little bit by approaching it from a different perspective, and that is, let me just give you an example of approaching something within yourself. One of the things that has been going on for me in the last few years is I picked up a musical instrument. Now, I have wanted to play a musical instrument most of my adult life, and when I was in high school, I played drums, but I wanted to learn something else, and so about 3 years ago, I picked up a bass. And one of the things that I noticed was that there was a part of me that says, oh, I'm not musically capable. I'm not, I can't learn this because I don't have the skill necessary. And of course, when I picked up the instrument and I started fooling around with it, I wasn't able to do anything. And as long as I held on to that belief about myself, I couldn't make any progress. But when I use translation, or I use the principles that Ben was just talking about, to recognize in a oneness universe, I am one with all skill, all talent, all ability. And when I really sort of embraced that idea, I didn't immediately expect that I was going to pick it up and be Jack Bruce, the greatest bass player of all time. But what I recognized that ability was there, and I was accepting of it so that I could actually engage in the discipline of learning the instrument so that I could actually do it. So, sometimes when we work with others, it can be a trap, and I think that's why it's important we have to work with ourselves. And in a way, Ben also did this. Ben talked about what his consciousness of this other person's just so Al in a way has to work with his consciousness of that other person at work, and that other person who's talking about someone who's prejudicial and that sort of thing. He has to work with his consciousness. Maybe a limited idea in his thoughts is, I don't have the ability to relate to this person, or I don't have the ability to overcome his limited thinking. But that's limitation. That's erroneous thought. And that when a scientist approaches a problem, let's say he's trying to figure out how to deal with malaria, for instance. When the scientist looks at this and say, well, we don't know what to do about this, he has to have an absolute conviction that there is a law in principle to be discovered. And once he discovers that law, then he can deal with the disease. All science works on this idea that there is something to be discovered. Well, it's the same thing. There is a way to talk to people about prejudicial thinking. I grew up, and I remember going to Florida when I was very young and seeing for the first time separate bathrooms, and listening to people talk about people of color as if they were a different species. And that just totally blew my mind. And when I investigated it, what I found was the common ground rather than the differences. And I think that since that time, there's been a lot of effort made to challenge those limited thinking, and we have transformed our society to where, I wouldn't say we've completely eliminated prejudice. I know that there were people that hated Barack Obama just because he was a person of color. But I think that we've come a long way as a country, and we really have come to recognize that kind of thinking is erroneous. So it is possible that it begins with having a conviction that there is a way through. And that's the point I'm trying to make right now.
If I may chirp in here, this is Richard Flannan.
Hi, Richard.
Number one thing I would do is I would anybody who doesn't know about translation, I would certainly ask and invest in yourself by learning it. That's number one thing. RHS would come afterwards. The other thing I would do is there's a book called The Crack in the Cosmic Egg. And when we learn that part of what we're experiencing, or all of what we're experiencing, comes from our own innate, either known thoughts or unknown thoughts. That could be either transcending or it could be shocking. Either way, translation would work and help you through that process. And the other thing is, you gotta remember that when people express themselves in a certain way, 90% of the time, they adopted that from either a person of authority, whether it was their dad, their mom, their grandpa, whomever. And in that moment, that person that they adopted that erroneous habit from, which is most likely what we're talking about here, where people fear other people and they just don't understand what they're saying, then if you get in his shoes, the person that is acting in an unfamiliar, unwelcome fashion, get in his shoes and find a way to get a relationship with him, if it's possible, and ask him, or at least observe him while he's doing that, and see what's going on. I mean, what is it about the people that he's ridiculing or diminishing their capacity? What is about them that he doesn't like? And then perhaps question him.
Richard, I think what you're sharing is really good, specific ways of working with these things. And there's so much to this topic that we can't possibly cover all of that today, but I think you really did come up with some really good points that I hope people find useful. I hope that everyone here today, because I want to move this towards conclusion because we're just about out of our time. I hope everyone here today will feel comfortable writing me or calling me on the telephone or sending me an email or even Skyping or Zooming with me and getting into a dialogue and asking their difficult questions. I mean, that's part of my commitment as a teacher or a mentor in the Prosperos, is to help others. And that actually also is a process that helps myself. The more I work with others, the more I find I get clarity in my mind. And the more clarity I get in my consciousness, it seems like my life works better. And I also have a sense of my life has more meaning and purpose. So I hope you understand, those of you who are new to our organization, that all of us who are mentors in our school, Ben, Al, Calvin, Heather, Melissa, I think, is on also today, that there's so many of us here that are committed to supporting you and in having your life work for you. And we will do our best not to tell you what to think, but try to show you how to think, because that's what ontology is all about.
So one more, let's say 3 more minutes for any other question that didn't get asked because of all this other time we were spending. If anybody has something that's pressing.
I do.
If not, okay, who's that?
Domenica.
Domenica, hi.
I'm a
Go
little
ahead.
stuck on erroneous thoughts. How do you recognize erroneous thoughts?
My response is erroneous thoughts always have a quality of limiting to them. Anything that says you can't, or that there's limits, or something along those lines, anything that appears to be less than whole is erroneous. Now, we're not talking about the world of appearances, and this is an important thing to recognize, is that we get fooled sometimes by visual things. Like, I'll give you a really simple example. Let's say I had a cup, and I dropped the cup on the floor, and the cup broke into 1,000 pieces. And we could say, well, there's no longer a whole cup. You have broken cups. So there's appearance of something being limited. But the reality is you're no longer seeing cup. What you're seeing is the wholeness, the perfection of molecules or particles of clay or whatever that no longer come together to form that perfect idea of cup. You have to have all of the pieces together about anything for perfection to manifest. If it's not perfect, it's not manifest. Like a car won't start if there's something missing that is required for it to function. So limited thoughts always have that quality of saying it's less than. Does that answer your question, Domenica?
Yes, it does.
Okay, good.
Richard, I really enjoyed your talk today, so thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Kelvin. And also, Richard, I just want to say I really was pleased to hear you share. It's a joy to have you be part of our organization, and I think you have a very good mind and have a lot to share, and I look forward to more dialogue with you. And I also want to thank people like Stephanie and Gina and Sandy and Jason, who are not members of the Prosperos, for tuning in today. And I hope that each of you in your own way will come to me with some questions or thoughts. You know, whether or not you want to investigate the Prosperos is not the point. The point is for us to be open to sharing with each other, because that's how we all learn.
Exactly. Thanks again, Richard, very much. Thanks everyone for coming today to the Sunday meeting. With this, I think we will wrap it up. Certainly, if you want to find out more about the Prosperos, you can go to the website at theprosperos.org. You can also contact the Bathtub Bulletin, or certainly those of you who have Richard teaching you in other areas, contact Richard and continue the dialogue. the dialogue is so important, the exchange of ideas, because we're all on the path one way or the other, and it's a great pleasure to know that I'm on the path with you.
Mhm.
So with that, we'd like to bid aloha to you all. Keep your eyes open for announcements about the next Sunday meeting presentation and certainly about Richard's upcoming lessons in ontology.
Yes.
Aloha, everyone.
Aloha.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Aloha.